Do you think quitting drinking is just about willpower? Well, think again. There are hidden forces at play that make stopping drinking far harder than you even realize. In this video, I'm uncovering 4 reasons why alcohol can be so difficult to quit, and the last one will leave you speechless. Stay tuned because what you're about to learn might completely change your perspective on alcohol and make it easy for you to stop drinking. So, a very quick introduction. My name is Leon Sylvester. I'm the founder of SoberClear.com, and we use a totally new method to help business owners and professionals get control of their drinking within as little as 48 hours. I myself had a drinking problem for close to a decade, and for the past 6 years, I have not touched a drop, and most importantly, I've had no desire. Now, if you want to get more information on the full program and how I work with people directly, just head over to SoberClear.com, and if you click the link in the description, you can actually book a call, and we can jump on a phone call together to really see if the program that I've developed could be a good match for you. It works without AA, without using willpower, without medication, without therapists. It's something completely different. So if you want information on the full program, just go to SoberClear.com, but if you actually want to book a call to see if it could be a good match, then just go and click the link down below. So, the first reason is because alcohol directly stimulates the brain's reward systems. So, throughout our species' evolution, there were certain things in our environment that we needed to survive and reproduce. As such, we evolved to derive pleasure from them. This was Mother Nature's way of ensuring that we would seek them out consistently. The 2 most famous examples of these so-called reinforcers are sex and food, especially sweet, high-calorie food. Why sex is a reinforcer is pretty obvious. Without it, we would all go extinct in 1 generation, and without food, we'd be dead in a few weeks. Now, other reinforcers are social in nature, most notably money and social status. What these reinforcers have in common is that A, they are pleasurable, and B, having them makes us seek them out even more. Scientists today know that on a neural level, all these reinforcers operate through the same circuit, the brain's so-called mesolimbic system. And the main neurotransmitter that controls the mesolimbic system is dopamine. Now, what alcohol, along with all other drugs of abuse, have in common is that they directly stimulate this mesolimbic system by releasing dopamine. By definition, this makes them rewarding and compels users to seek them out more and more. Drinkers typically like to fool themselves by claiming that they enjoy the taste, the smell, the texture, or what have you. But the truth is that alcohol is nasty through and through. The main reason that they drink, at least at the start, is the stimulation of the mesolimbic system and associated reward. In studies with rats, for example, scientists drill holes in their skulls and insert electrodes that stimulate their reward system. The rats can then activate the electrodes by pressing a lever. After they've been trained on this, the rats will press the lever an astonishing number of times in order to deliver an electrical stimulation to their reward system. Now, technology hasn't reached a point yet where we can directly stimulate our reward centers without drilling holes in our skull. I can assure you that when that gadget becomes available, its creator will probably become the richest person in history. Until that time, we'll have to settle for second best, namely substances like alcohol, which deliver a massive supercharged boost to our reward center. Now, natural rewards like sex or social status can't compete with drugs like alcohol for 2 main reasons. Firstly, booze requires almost no work. It's as easy as opening a bottle and pouring a drink. Secondly, the reward is instant and there is no limit to the number of rewards. Compare this supercharged reward to the time and energy that you need to invest into getting a partner, for example. And after you get a partner, there is a physiological limit to the number of times that you can have sex. But with booze, sky is the limit. You can drink yourself to your heart's content. So what we tend to see in chronic heavy drinkers is a numbing out of their reward system. Because it's being constantly abused, it eventually shuts down. And when this happens, the natural reinforcements that previously gave them pleasure do absolutely nothing for them. It's not a coincidence that those suffering with alcohol use disorder are often completely socially isolated and undernourished. They simply lose the pleasure that the rest of us take for granted from things as fundamental as social interactions and sometimes even food. All this, mind you, while alcohol brands continue to market their product as a social lubricant that will make you enjoy life to the fullest. So, number 2, over time, you drink to avoid the negative effects of withdrawal. So, it would be bad enough if alcohol just hijacked our reward system, but this is only part of the story. We just saw how, over time, it destroys our ability to derive pleasure from natural reinforcements. But it does the exact same for artificial reinforcers, starting with alcohol itself. See, the reward system of heavy drinkers is completely fried through and through, and no matter how much alcohol they consume, they don't get any reward out of it. They may still want it, but they no longer like it. The question is, why do we keep on drinking at that point? Why do we go on long after it stopped giving us pleasure and the only thing we feel towards it is hate? Scientists generally agree that in the early stages of alcohol abuse, we drink for these rewarding effects, the so-called positive reinforcement. But with time, as our reward circuits become desensitized, negative emotions start to dominate. The drinker only keeps on drinking to avoid the nastiness of any withdrawal. At this point, neural systems associated with negative feelings, such as the amygdala, become more and more prominent. This process is called negative reinforcement. The anxiety, restlessness, the blues, sleeplessness, irritability, drinking more is the only way to relieve them. On a molecular level, a lot of this unpleasant stuff happens because alcohol messes up with the function of a neurotransmitter called glutamate. This is the major excitatory neurotransmitter in our nervous system. In other words, it's the main messenger chemical that our brain cells use to signal to other cells that it's time to get busy and start firing. See, alcohol inhibits the normal functioning of the glutamate system, leading to a general slowing down of the nervous system. Things like sleepiness, a general slowing down, an inability to work, reduced reaction times, these are all linked to an inhibited glutamate system. Now, the problem in chronic drinkers is that the glutamate system eventually tries to compensate for its constant inhibition by alcohol. The nervous system eventually ups its natural base activity of glutamate. What this means is that drinkers eventually end up in a steady state of chronic glutamate overactivation. They are constantly on the edge, constantly irritable, constantly anxious, and nervous. And drinking is the only way to temporarily suppress the overactive glutamate system and restore some sanity. Now, glutamate is only part of the puzzle. Alcohol is actually unique in just how many different neurotransmitters and neural networks it messes up with time. And the sad thing is to go on drinking is the drinker's only way to cover up all of these neuroadaptations and make the pain go away, at least until the next drink. To repeat, this happens long after the reward system has been fried and they have stopped getting any pleasure out of booze. It's almost like the life of a slave. Now, free, it is socially acceptable and ubiquitous. See, in most countries of the world, alcohol is the only legal recreational drug. Up until recently, that is, as cannabis is now becoming increasingly legalized. Now, why this is so is pretty puzzling, given that alcohol is easily one of the most toxic and socially destructive recreational drugs. Be that as it may, governments around the world have spared it from criminalization. This sets it apart from other drugs in a number of ways when it comes to addictiveness. For starters, there's the obvious factors of availability, lack of legal repercussions, relatively low cost, and purity of manufacture. You get a sudden craving for booze, say 3 weeks into your sobriety, and relapse is as easy as walking over to your local grocery store. It doesn't matter if you've moved to a different location or even a different part of the world and you don't know anybody in town. There is simply no escaping alcohol's 24/7 availability. And unlike other drugs, this will be a relatively affordable, high-grade drug where the label tells you pretty much exactly what you're ingesting. So not only is it easy to score alcohol, unless you live in a cave, it's basically impossible for you not to be reminded of it. On television, magazines, the movies, even songs, we are constantly bombarded by a systematic glorification campaign in the media and popular culture. But it gets much worse. Alcohol is basically the only drug in the world where you are almost forced to take it at times. Just go to a party and count the number of times people have asked you to have a drink. Even your employer sometimes expects you to drink. If you've been to work events like end-of-year parties, you'll know what I'm talking about. Then you have rituals and ceremonies like weddings where not drinking is actively frowned upon. People will not just want you to drink, but they'll look at you with suspicion if you refuse to, like there's something wrong with you and you're spoiling the party. There is simply no other recreational drug that will present you with these challenges. Even with cannabis, which is now legal in many states, you'll almost never be actively pressured into smoking it, much less disparaged for avoiding it. See, alcohol is well and truly in a league of its own here. And now this leads us to our fourth and final reason on today's list. It's one of the most pernicious and underappreciated ones of all. In a nutshell, it's this. By the time you've become addicted to alcohol, you've also become a lesser version of your former self. Here I'm referring to your cognitive capacity. Alcohol has literally eaten away at your ability to think and come up with solutions to problems, including your problem drinking. So let's unpack this a bit further. Now, something we've covered in other videos is how toxic alcohol is to your brain. It will literally kill off countless brain cells, so by the time of their death, a heavy drinker's brain can weigh an average of an ounce less. Though no part of the brain is spared, some are hit particularly hard, and one of these is the so-called frontal lobe, the front part of our brain just behind our forehead. This is home to our so-called executive function. When scientists refer to executive function, they mean a collection of cognitive faculties that allow us to plan, control, and monitor our behavior in order to attain specific goals. Now, some of the faculties that make up executive function include self-awareness, working memory, emotional and motivational regulation, and problem solving. When we talk about response inhibition, we're referring to the ability to suppress or stop an automatic response in order to execute a different, more appropriate response. I'll give you an example of a neuropsychological test that healthcare professionals will frequently use to assess a person's executive function. This is the Wisconsin card sorting test, which is basically a series of cards with different symbols on them. One card can have 2 triangles in red color, another one star in green color. You hand the person the cards and then prompt them to sort according to a specific criteria, say color. So the person has to stack the cards in terms of color only. Then after a while, you change the criteria to say number of symbols on the card. And this is where people with compromised executive function tend to get stuck. Even though the previous rule is no longer correct and they are constantly getting feedback by the experimenter to this effect, they cling to this older, outdated rule. In other words, they struggle to incorporate updated information from their environment in order to modify their existing course of action. They're basically stuck. Is this starting to ring a bell for any of you? Now, alcohol intoxication will severely impair anybody's executive function, but for heavy, chronic drinkers, the impairments are chronic and constant, regardless of whether they are drunk or not. Give a group of heavy drinkers any test that measures executive function, like the Wisconsin card sorting test, and they will perform worse than a matched group of controls. And scientists now understand that these deficits are causally linked to more drinking. In other words, not only does the drinking cause deficits in executive function, but these deficits then make it all the more difficult to stop drinking, all the more likely that someone will drink themselves to ruin. And when you consider what executive function entails, it could really be no other way. For starters, impaired executive function means that you'll find it more challenging to set goals and take the appropriate actions. Not just the goal of quitting booze, any goal that would require sobriety. You are also less likely to successfully integrate feedback from your environment regarding your drinking and adapt that to the changing conditions. You'll find it more difficult to control your impulses and inhibit automatic reactions. Everything will become a bit of a pattern. You'll be stuck in a rut, just like in the card sorting task. And it's not just that stopping drinking itself will become more difficult. More or less all aspects of your life will be negatively affected, leaving the bottle as the only bitter escape. It becomes a never-ending vicious cycle. The more you drink, the more your executive function suffers, making it even more difficult for you to stop drinking.